Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees, the podcast. Well, going to look back at a little Yankee history here for you podcast subscribers here, which is why you want to subscribe to this podcast, and kind of got away a little bit, obviously looked to do a little extra stuff other than talk about current Yankee news. So in this episode, we're going to look back at Mike Gallego. Reason I picked Mike Gallego, had a decent major league career, nothing earth-shattering either way, but probably in terms of Yankees, he's, I guess, probably best known as the player who had number 2 before Derek Jeter, the captain, took over the number there. So you can almost call him the second to last number 2 for the Yankees there. So figure we'll look back at his illustrious career. So I guess kick back a little bit. But before we get started, make sure you're a subscriber of this podcast if you're not already. And of course, there's a YouTube version of the show. Just dropped the latest episode a day or two ago there. So you want to catch up well and get all the current Yankee news there. So go to YouTube, Section 420 Talkin Yankees, and crush that subscribe button. So anyway, read that pick also Mike Gallego. Yes, of course he's known, for Yankee in terms of Yankee lore that he's the player that had number 2 before Derek Jeter. But also, it's kind of around the time I really started got interested in baseball and the Yankees. Obviously I grew up a Yankee fan, but when you're like 4 or 5 years old, you really don't know what's going on much, even when you're like 7 or 8. But around that time, it was like 93, 94. I was about 12 years old, and then you kind of understand the game better. And then when you understand the game better, you like the game better. And that's when I really started getting into the Yankees probably the most. And kind of Gallego was part of that core. He was at shortstop. Pat Kelly was at second base. Don Mattingly first base. Wade Boggs at third base. Then in the center field was Bernie Williams. Right field was, of course, Paul O'Neill, who they traded from the Reds. And then left field was kind of a mishmash. You had a little Luis Polonia. You had Dion James. And then behind the dish, remember, it was Mike Stanley. And then designated hitter around that time was Danny Tartabull, who the Yankees got from the Royals. And that was kind of like the core group there for around 92, 93, 94, when the Yankees sort of turned the tide a little bit and, kind of lay the foundation for the Joe Torre dynasty Yankees. But it was really that early 90s group, and I don't say early 90s, like 92, 93 group that kind of sort of paved the way a little bit. And then, of course, they made the decision to let Buck go. Joe Torre comes in. They changed the team a little bit more. But you still had some of those guys left over there. Now, unfortunately, by the time Mike Gallego was gone, but again, he kind of sort of lit the fuse for that and laid the foundation for, good things that happened thereafter. But let's focus this on Mike Gallego. Now, you look at his name, it looks like almost like Gallego, but he is of a Mexican descent, so it's actually pronounced Gallego. So Mike Gallego, born October 31st, 1960, so just recently had his 64th birthday, and he was out of Whittier, California. Now, he went to the University of California, and he played on the U.S. national team in the 1979 Pan American Games. Mainly a second baseman, but again, he's kind of a little bit of a jack of all trades on the infield, so was always able to play with some shortstop as well as third base. He's kind of your prototypical utility, old school, just infielder type where you don't expect much out of his bat there, and he kind of hits, 8th and 9th in the lineup. That's kind of the way infielders were back in the day. Now you have, obviously, once like Jeter and A-Rod and Nomar came on the scene, you have like shortstops now that hit like 40 home runs, and second baseman now that hit like 30, 40 home runs. Well, that wasn't, you didn't have like Marcus Semien type players back in the day. Most players were kind of like a Mike Gallego guy where it's just, all right, play good defense, hit 230, 240, whatever you give us on offense is a plus there. And that type of player Mike Gallego was, and he was kind of shorter than most, only at 5'6" there, so he had to compete in the majors. Again, guys well taller than him. Now, initially the Pirates were looking at him to draft him, but he felt he was too short, and it was actually probably better off because he would fall into a much better situation being drafted by the Oakland A's, and they took him in the second round of the 1981 amateur draft. Now, he had a little turbulence getting to the majors. Finally, he actually had a bout of testicular cancer, which he luckily got radiation treatment, was able to get into remission. Then once that was all cleared, finally was able to make his debut, and that was April 11th, 1985, at the age of 24. Again, it's kind of a bit of a part-time player at this time, but interesting enough, talking about jerseys, had a little bit of a run-in with another former Yankee and another Yankee great, and that would be Reggie Jackson. Now, you may recall Reggie Jackson, he started his career with the Oakland A's as number 9. And again, he was part of that early Oakland team in the early 70s, I think 71, 72, 73, they went to the World Series 3 years in a row. That was kind of where it really put Reggie on the map in the early days of the Mr. October. It was actually really there in Oakland, not, as he became more known as Mr. October when he played with the Yankees, but that kind of really got started with the Oakland A's. But at that point, he was number 9, which just happened to be Mike Gallego's number at that time. So Reggie returned to the Oakland A's in his final season in 1987, and I actually did a podcast about that. I focused on his last game at Yankee Stadium, which was in the Oakland A's uniform there as a player. So I kind of did a kickback that. So if you want to kind of scroll back about a year or so ago, you'll probably see that podcast. You want to check out that story. It's pretty interesting as well. But back to Mike Gallego's, he had number 9. Now, when Reggie came in, Reggie wanted to return to his number 9 because that's what he was with Oakland. But it turns out Mike Gallego didn't want to give up the number because, as you know, baseball players are very superstitious. So, and I guess enough time has passed where at that time now Reggie became, known as number 44 when he was with the Yankees, and he kind of carried that with the California Angels. And so, at that point, it wasn't as big a deal. So actually, even though Reggie was the guy who hit 500 home runs and multi-champion, multiple World Series winner, Mr. October, the whole deal there, he actually gave way to Mike Gallego. So Gallego was able to keep his number 9, and Reggie's stuck with the 44 in the Oakland uniform. But yeah, again, Reggie, he was both number 9 and number 44 in his 2 tenures with the Oakland A's. And as I mentioned before, Gallego ended up in a better situation than he did with the Pirates because, with Gallego there at that time, you had Mark McGwire coming up through the ranks. You had Jose Canseco coming up there. And, of course, the great manager Tony La Russa there. And Gallego was part of a Oakland A's team that went to the World Series that got the AL pennant 3 years in a row there. But unfortunately, in the first shot in 1988, they were upset by the Los Angeles Dodgers. But they did win the championship, and that was the 1989 series against the San Francisco Giants, which they swept. But unfortunately, that was also the earthquake game at Candlestick Park, which had to be canceled. Again, the earthquake during the infamous earthquake, which Mike Gallego said he was in the locker room at the time, and he actually felt the thing shaking there. And again, luckily, nothing, the stadium didn't collapse or anything, but of course, that was a big issue at the time. But yes, Oakland did win that 1989 World Series, which would be the only championship for Mike Gallego as either a player or a coach, but he would go to the World Series yet again in the following year, 1990, but that was the Cincinnati Reds won that one. That was Paul O'Neill's first championship there, so again, they would cross paths later as teammates, but so for Oakland, they make the World Series 3 years in a row, but they only come away with one World Series ring there, so that was just it for Mike Gallego in terms of a player. And again, he probably had his, I guess you would say best moment as a hitter, or just like feat, we just say that would be in 1990, where he led the American League with 17 sacrifice hits there. So I guess a little claim to fame. Again, not much of a bat guy, but again, more of a glove guy. And then 1991, career high in home runs with 12 there. So again, not much of a hitter there, but would spend 7 seasons in Oakland. Now, interesting enough, he wanted to stay as an Oakland A, but he came up against free agency. And at this point of his career, this is your time to get a multi-year deal, and that's what he was looking for. And at the time, Sandy Olson, which would go on to be the Mets GM many years later there, was the GM of the Oakland A's, and they just couldn't get a multi-year deal for Mike Gallego, and he wanted to stay, but fortunately, Gallego wanted to get a multi-year deal, and the only team willing to, I guess the best option to give him a multi-year deal would be the New York Yankees. Now, funny enough, when Gallego got a call from his agent, he said, yeah, New York wants to sign you. Now, Gallego assumed it was the Mets because the Yankees had a number of second basemen, as I mentioned before, Pat Kelly waiting the wings, but they signed Gallego but wanting him to play shortstop. So that was the Yankees wanted him to play shortstop again, which he was a little bit shocked with. But again, since he wanted a multi-year deal, he took the offer from the Yankees, so he would come over to play for the New York Yankees as a shortstop. Now, it didn't actually get off to his greatest of foot there. Now, he signed January 9th of 1992, but his first season was marred a little bit. He only played 53 games, maybe because he was dealing with plantar fasciitis. An issue there, and kind of took him out of favor a little bit because at the time, that's when Buck Showalter took over from the Yankees, was promoted from their minor league system, and I guess just from the injury there, there was a little turbulence to say between the two of them. I mean, Gallego mentioned at one time felt like he wasn't getting played enough, and that really that Buck liked him, but maybe the orders were coming up from upstairs, and we've seen this happen in recent days that basically the GM and the front office was making out the lineup more than Buck was there. So a little turbulence between the two of them, but eventually they did iron out their differences. And he did reference one story there about Don Mattingly, just talking about being in that clubhouse where, they didn't have any superstars, but you just had good, solid players like Don Mattingly, like Paul O'Neill, like Wade Boggs there. So one day, Gallego wanted to show up early for batting practice. He said he got to Yankee Stadium like a little before 7 a.m., and he saw that Don Mattingly was already there taking pitches in the batting cage. Now, he wasn't swinging at pitches. He literally was just seeing the ball. He just wanted to see the ball. He went through 3 buckets of balls of just standing there at the plate and just watching the pitches come down just so he could see pitches. So just to show you what a dedicated hitter, Mattingly was. Again, there before 7 a.m. Just to get a workout in. But I mentioned before, not really a great hitting career, especially in the Yankee uniform there. Again, was only there for 2 seasons. But he was part of that unit that just started to change the tide a little bit. Obviously, they improved themselves in 1993, got to 88 wins, and then 94. Again, we're pretty much on their way to at least getting the American League title there. There were 4.5 games ahead, and I actually a couple of years ago on YouTube actually did a whole segment on the 1994 Yankee team there, but unfortunately that was the strike year that cut the season short. So that was a team that was at least primed to go to the playoffs, and again they were really bummed out that they wanted to get a championship for Don Mattingly, but unfortunately the strike cut that short. Now the Yankees would go on to finally get at least a postseason berth for Mattingly in 95, but of course we know what happened there. After a 2-0 lead to the Mariners, losing all 3 games in Seattle there, and this losing in heartbreak fashion, which was really put the stake in the heart of Buck Showalter and led to him being fired by Steinbrenner. But again, not to get too far off the court there. But again, Mike Gallego only in the Yankee uniform for 2 seasons, but he wore the infamous number 2, which would then go to Derek Jeter the following year when Jeter was called up as a rookie late in the season there. So Gallego donning the number 2 for 2 seasons as a Yankee. And overall, if you want to look at his career as a Yankee, only played in 261 games. Again, I mentioned the 92 season, he was marred by the plantar fasciitis, so didn't get too much playing time. And again, a little bit turbulence with him and Buck, and he felt like Buck didn't put him in the lineup enough and that stuff like that. So, that might have hurt his playing time as well there. But did hit a somewhat respectable 262 batting average, which, for a mid-infielder back in those days, that's kind of what they hit. 231 hits, only 19 home runs, 109 total RBIs, 126 runs, and only 3 stolen bases. So again, not really much of a speed demon on the base there. Now after that, he would return to the Oakland A's in 95, would sign as a free agent. And I guess in 95, they had a little bit of a feat of himself, a historical feat. So he had 28 consecutive hits without an extra base hit, which right to this period right now, as they call it, the post-1912 period of baseball, is still a record that held up. So he has 28 hits without an extra base hit in there. So to this day, that's still a record. Now, he only played 43 games for the A's in 95, and at this point, his career was winding down a little bit, but had a little bit of a reunion, and that would be in 1996 when he went to the Cardinals. And at that point, Tony La Russa, who managed him in the 80s, in the late 80s and early 90s in Oakland, at this time was managing the Cardinals. So Gallego was able to reunite with La Russa, but again, at this point, his career was definitely winding down. Only played 26 games in the 1997 season, and at the age of 36, he was eventually released on July 29th, 1997, again, which ended his 13-year playing career. But at that point, he was not done with baseball totally yet. 7 years later, he was hired by the Colorado Rockies as a third base coach from late 2004 through the 2008 season. And in 2007, you may recall, the Rockies went on into the World Series to face the Red Sox, and the Red Sox swept them in 4 games. But Gallego, again, was the third base coach during that. So, again, he got yet a 4th trip to the World Series, this time as a coach. But unfortunately for him and the Rockies, they were swept by the Red Sox. Then afterwards, he would have yet another reunion with Oakland A's, so this time his 3rd go-around. But this was as a third base coach and infield assistant after the 2008 season. And he stayed with the organization until August 24th, 2015, when he was quote-unquote dismissed. But he still had ways to go in the baseball world, and that would be just a couple months later. He stayed on the West Coast, hired on November 25th, 2015, as the director of baseball development for the and I always make fun of this organization's name, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, which because they called themselves at that time. Then a couple of years later, 2019, he was promoted to third base coach, so back in the third base coach box there. And then he was promoted further before the 2020 COVID season as bench coach for the Angels. And he stayed with the organization for a couple of seasons there through the 2022 season, which was then later reassigned within the organization. So that was the mark where we stand now with Mike Gallego. Again, 13 years as a player, and then afterwards, took a little bit of a hiatus, and then spent about 7-8 seasons as a third base coach, and now again with the Angels organizations as of now. But seemed like he's really he was working in scouting, a little doing kind of side administrative work there. Kind of really hard to see what he's doing exactly this moment there, but again, sort of like the last we heard of him, he's somewhere within the Angels front office doing something, stapling papers together, maybe something like that. Now, interesting enough, just coming off this World Series against the Dodgers, he is the uncle of Dodger catcher Austin Barnes. So I'm sure Yankee fans want to forget about this current World Series, but Austin Barnes was the catcher there. Again, he picked up the 2024 World Series trophy there. So little Gallego connection even with that in mind there. So that's the episode. So that's Mike Gallego. Again, interesting little career there, and again, doing it at 5'6" there. So, sometimes you say, you're too small for this, you can't do this, do that. But again, you can find ways to compensate and, still thrive and survive in the game there. And again, Mike Gallego is kind of, spitting proof of that. And, these days now, especially with pitchers, there's kind of things like if you're not at least 6 foot or over, like, a lot of scouts won't even look at you. And if you can't throw it near 100 miles per hour, they won't even look at you. So there's certain little attributes that, maybe now that Gallego, maybe if he's coming up through college and the minors, maybe he wouldn't get a shot because of his size, possibly. But again, back then it was a little bit different. So, luckily for him, he was able to, pave his way and have a decent career. Got the one World Series ring. If you're a Yankee fan, I guess his claim to fame that, he was number 2 before Derek Jeter there. And probably the only other player you would say of some sort of notoriety who wore number 2 that you kind of would stick in your head before Jeter, that would be Bobby Mercer, who wore the Yankee captain number 2, back in his heyday in pinstripes as well. So that's the episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And again, make sure you're a podcast subscriber so you get these cool things like that. And we've got the whole offseason ahead of us, and we'll still find out what's going to go on with Soto and Christian Walker maybe at first base, and then some other moves that Cash and Mike made. So make sure you're a podcast subscriber. And again, I want to try to do some more episodes like this of this, throwback Yankee history, other cool stuff that's exclusive for you podcast subscribers. So won't be on YouTube, won't be on TV. You can only get it by being a podcast subscriber. Catch you next time.